Hey, what's up, everybody? Chris here, and I wanted to bring you my review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I just took my oldest son to see it. He's 12 years old. When it was over, I asked him what he would rate it, and I didn't really say, rate it on a scale of 1 to 10 or anything, but he said I'd give it a 9 out of 10. He really enjoyed it. I think if I compare it to the other Guardians films, I would say this is my second favorite. I still think the original is the best one, but the second one, which I did still like, kind of gets taken down a notch when compared to this one, I think, and it does a lot of things really well. So let's jump into it. Hey, as always, if you're enjoying the content, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Please be sure to click the subscribe button. And as always, I very much appreciate your viewership. So I think with these movies, there's kind of an established formula, right? And not necessarily just for Marvel films in general, but for Guardians of the Galaxy specifically. There are certain boxes that people probably want to see checked. They want the sort of off-the-wall humor that James Gunn sort of, instills in these films, and you get plenty of that here. It is, I wouldn't say that it's laugh out loud funny all the time, but it elicited a lot of smiles from me anyway, and I think my son found it pretty funny too. And you may have seen this in some of the marketing, but this is the first Guardians movie and maybe even the first Marvel movie that has an F-bomb in it, which kind of took me by surprise. But the use of it is kind of out of left field, but still adds to the humor really well. So I think that they placed it where they should have for maximum effect. It's got the crazy action sequences that you would expect. There's one hallway sequence that's especially great. It kind of goes back to some of the stuff, I think, from the first film in terms of sort of the choreography and the way that it's set up. But I really like that sequence. I thought that was super well done. And really what kind of shocked me about this one, I don't even know if shocked is the right word, but something I didn't expect is that it's kind of, in a lot of ways, a character origin movie more than it is anything else. I mean, it is definitely a capper to this trilogy. I'm not going to get into spoilers necessarily, but I would say that this is a good kind of bookend to Guardians of the Galaxy as sort of not necessarily a full franchise, because there are some hints that some of these characters are probably going to return down the road in some capacity, but it kind of nicely ties together this whole story. But it also, again, works well as sort of a character study. I mean, this is really Rocket's movie more than anything else. It's all about Rocket. And some of his backstory type of stuff is hinted at in the other movies potentially, but here you really get into the details surrounding that. And really the villain of this film is tied to Rocket's past. I think that all the, principal players that you have seen in the other Guardians films do a great job here. Zoe Saldana, Chris Pratt, Vin Diesel, Dave Bautista, everybody's sort of in top form. You can tell that they were really having a good time with this, and it didn't feel like anyone was phoning it in. Even some of the characters that have kind of stepped forward and taken a more prominent role, right? Nebula is an example, and gosh, I can't remember his name. The guy with the fin who takes over for Yondu, he's got the arrow now. He does a good job here, which I think is actually maybe James Gunn's brother. I think maybe potential. I have to look that up to confirm that. But anyway, everybody does a great job with this. One of the things that was kind of distracting for me early on is if you've seen the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special, they very clearly were reusing a set at the beginning of this and actually in a number of different scenes in this film, which is totally fine and it makes sense within the context of the Guardians universe. Nowhere, right? Sort of this giant floating godhead that they exist in. It just, for some reason, at the very beginning, just made me think, oh, okay, I can see why they did the holiday special, because they had access to this set and wanted to make use of the property, right, that they had in front of them. But at the very beginning, for whatever reason, that took me a little bit out of it right from the start, but I was able to kind of push that aside and just enjoy the movie for what it was. Again, action-wise, I think it's one of the top-tier offerings. And so when you look at it from that perspective that I was mentioning earlier, checking boxes, does it check the boxes you would want to see with the Guardians of the Galaxy movie? I would say that yes, it does. It's gross in a lot of ways, actually, and I would say, and I've seen some other commentators say something similar to this, but it's probably the most violent of the Marvel movies, potentially. It's definitely got some pretty gross moments in it. There were a couple of moments where my 12-year-old son just sort of said, ugh, like, it was something that was happening on screen. But it checks all the boxes. It's funny, great action, really solid story. I would say very good character development, and actually, in some ways, a lot better than you get in some other Marvel properties. Maybe on par with the first Guardians, maybe a little bit better. One thing that I loved about this, and this is potentially a little bit spoilery, so if you haven't seen it, maybe step away and then come back once you have seen it, is that there's not really this tidy wrap-up with Quill and Gamora, right? It's not like they suddenly get back together. Everything is as it was pre-Thanos snap here. It's kind of a messy thing, and it ends on sort of a messy note, and I think there's a hint of realism associated with that I appreciated. I didn't want it to be nicely and neatly wrapped up with a pretty bow kind of thing, and I think that they did a good job ending it where they did. And again, this is sort of the end of the story as we know it for these Guardians, but there are some hints that they're going to be back in different capacities. In terms of anything lacking here, and again, I know I'm kind of venturing into spoiler territory. I said I wouldn't do that, but I need to talk a little bit about this just to kind of highlight this one thing. The one thing that it felt like was a little bit missing here, one thing that I kind of expected to see but didn't see, is that nobody dies in this movie. And that it's not to say that in a trilogy capper or in a franchise capper you have to have a character death, but it just kind of makes it I don't know if toothless is the right word, but it makes it just a little bit less weighty or impactful than it might have been. There were a number of moments where I really thought that one of the major characters, various major characters actually were going to bite the bullet in this, but it just never really happened. But I think the way that they tied up all their stories is totally fine, and it works within the context of the film. So overall, I really enjoyed this. I liked it a lot. It's one that I'll probably pick up on 4K Blu-ray when it comes out. I'm sure it's going to look gorgeous in that transfer, and I'll rewatch it several different times because I really did have a great time with it. My son loved it. He actually wants the soundtrack. It's got a great soundtrack. I mean, when you think about one of the strengths of the Guardians movies, the music is one of them. That's no different here. It does a great job with that. But anyway, if you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. And as always, thanks so much for watching.